Chapter 2, Familiar Sayings. Here is an old expression familiar to many people. If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you read the newspaper, you're misinformed. That quotation has been attributed to Mark Twain, but I haven't actually found the source, so I can't say for certain. However, here is a similar quotation with solid attribution. Thomas Jefferson once wrote, quote, "The man who never looks into a newspaper is better informed than he who reads them, inasmuch as he who knows nothing is nearer to truth than he whose mind is filled with falsehoods and errors." You might think the news business has improved its track record since Jefferson's day. You might be mistaken. Daniel Borstein, who served as the Librarian of the United States Congress from 1975 to 1987, explained in his book The Image how journalists are purposefully co-opted, misled, or confused by government officials or spokespersons that they interview. Quote, "The reporter himself is often not clear whether he is being told a simple fact, a newly settled policy, an administrative hope, or whether perhaps untruths are being deliberately diffused in order to allay public fears that the true facts are really true. The government official himself, who is sometimes no more than a spokesman, may not be clear. The reporter's task is to find a way of weaving these threads of unreality into a fabric that the reader will not recognize as entirely unreal." End quote. Borstein, an historian at the University of Chicago, wrote about many topics in American and world history. Listen again to that last sentence by Borstein. Quote, "The reporter's task is to find a way of weaving these threads of unreality into a fabric that the reader will not recognize as entirely unreal." What do you make of Borstein's statement? Do you think news organizations portray themselves as more polished and prepared and assured than they really are? Do you think they deceive us or persuade us, whether intentionally or not, instead of presenting us with responsibly sourced and well-vetted information in a neutral manner? Independent investigative journalist Cheryl Atkinson has explained it in this way. "Nearly every bit of content that crosses our path is put there for a reason, often by entities that expended significant resources to do so." Atkinson has been a reporter since the early 1980s, working for networks such as CNN, CBS, and PBS. Her reporting has won multiple Emmy and Edward R. Murrow Awards, and she has written several best-selling books. She is an accomplished journalist by any measure. During her career, she encountered the obstruction of truthful information, many times in different ways. While working at her final network position, which was CBS News, Atkinson noticed a gradual but growing interference into her work by an emerging class of managers positioned higher up in the organization, who increasingly prevented the publishing of her investigative reporting. It was distressing to Atkinson to witness the censoring of stories that she felt the public had a right to know about. When her protests to superiors at CBS had no effect, Atkinson decided to leave the network and establish her own independent means to freely publish important findings. Just before Atkinson left CBS, she learned that her computers had been hacked into and spied on by government employees. She attempted to sue the government. This lawsuit has dragged on for years. Now, more than a decade later, she continues to endure an ongoing legal battle against the government as it strives to prevent any progress with this investigation. Atkinson says, quote, "I have learned a hard fact about the court system and process. It's not enough to prove the government spied on me. We've had that forensic evidence for years, and it's irrefutable. It's more a game of figuring out how to get the case to trial so that justice can be served. Laws passed by Congress and court precedents offer every protection to the guilty federal agents in ways that probably weren't intended. First, the federal employees and their supervisors have broad immunity for their actions. Second, the burden of what's required to get a case to court is unrealistically high. For example, the courts ask that we provide the names of the guilty parties prior to getting full discovery, but we need full discovery to learn the names of the guilty parties. Third, to be able to question current and ex-government employees who have information on the computer intrusions so that we have evidence to take to trial, we must first obtain permission from the government, which is the guilty party." Atkinson adds, quote, "It's worth mentioning that one government agent, Ryan White, who admitted being part of the surveillance against me, who recently turned up dead, said that the rogue unit he was part of, under then U.S. Attorney Rod Rosenstein at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Baltimore, was spying on hundreds of U.S. citizens, not just me, and not just other journalists. National Security Administration whistleblower Edward Snowden revealed improper surveillance by our government on a massive scale. Nobody was ever punished, except for the whistleblower, Snowden. And there have been numerous documented cases of our intel agencies spying on members of Congress and their staff. There was a time when any single instance of this type of unconstitutional activity by our government would have generated international headlines and outrage. Today, it's become normalized." You might have believed that news organizations are in the business of transparent journalism, but I will share evidence with you during this presentation regarding how various power centers influence the news business and interfere with the publishing of truth.